Memorial Day weekend, many of our families and our people kind of travel and scatter. But I also want to just put this out for those of us who are here this weekend. The Memorial Day parade in Barrington comes right by our church. In the past couple of years, we've had some fun putting just baked goods and lemonade out there for people to come and have some. It's not a bake sale. We're just giving food and drink out. So I want to put that invitation. If you are around tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock is when the parade starts. If you could bring some lemonade, if you want to cook something, that would be fun. Just to hand out and interact. There's quite a crowd that comes out. So you are officially invited. You look good today after last week's sermon in Ecclesiastes. I didn't know if I was going to see like Doritos smashed up on people's shirts. You look like you've showered, like you made it through your week. Even with a pretty heavy topic of Ecclesiastes and what's meaningful, what's not meaningful. We are moving on to chapter 2 today. How many of you in the past 6 months have been to a doctor or a physical therapist? Physical therapists are the worst. I mean, they're great. But man, they hurt you. They hurt you in order to help you. But how many in the past 6 months have been somewhere where they asked how your pain scale is, 0 to 10? Wow, a lot of you have. I find that question always hard to answer. Like you, I don't know, am I able to handle pain more than other folk? I like to think that I can, but I'm not really sure. And so, as a doctor will ask me, 0 to 10, where's your pain? In the back of my mind, I think, I'm at a 6, but most people would be at a 9. Like, I'm that kind of rugged, but reality is, my 6 might be your 3. And I always struggle on that. Where's that pain scale? The doctor, he doesn't really care what that number is because he's just looking to diminish it. Like he wants to notch it down. If it's a 6, he wants to try to get you at a 4. If you're at a 3, he wants to get you at a 1, etc. But what if we were to flip that question around this morning? What's your satisfaction scale today? 0 to 10. Where are you in being satisfied with life? Being satisfied with your circumstances, your health, your wealth, your place, your marriage, your family, your job. Where are you on a satisfaction scale? And then the next question is, wherever you are, what would it take to notch that up a little bit? If you answered, I don't know, I'm like a 5, it's pretty good, it's just not great. What would it take to make that number a 7? Maybe another way to phrase that question is, what would be required for you to be a little more satisfied in life? What if, and then we could fill in the blank with all sorts of things. What if you had a better job? What if your college expenses were paid for? What if your retirement was completely funded? Do any of those begin to register like, wow, yeah, like that would make a great difference. My satisfaction scale would definitely notch up. Wonder how you would finish that. If only something, then I'd be a bit more satisfied. Solomon today, who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, is going to undergo an experiment, okay? Last week we kind of got introduced to Solomon, who he was. Solomon is far beyond any of our ability to do anything. His wealth, his power, his prestige, his influence, far beyond what you and I had the ability to do. And so as Solomon does an experiment, the reality is you and I have done the same experiment. The experiment is, will I be more satisfied by something? So maybe we work overtime to collect some more money because we need it and we'll be more satisfied. Maybe for some of us, we study a little harder because we want a good grade so that we can get into the better college because we'll be a little more satisfied at that point. We've all tried the experiment, okay? I had the opportunity earlier this year, some of the kids that meet at our church here, there's a class, Madeline's class, maybe 8 kids. Tad was in there too. Did a science experiment, okay? This is a great picture for me. Okay, Solomon's going to do an experiment, the same one that we've tried off and on. Most of the kids have these poster boards. You know how it is, in typewritten, some pictures posted up, the hypothesis, the experimental process, the conclusion. All of them very, very similar, even though they're targeting different topics, except for one. You see, one of Madeline's classmates, her dad was a scientist, and her dad worked in a laboratory. And so her pictures showed people in lab coats with microscopes doing the experiment that she had laid out. Meanwhile, Madeline had cooked chocolate chip cookies. That's a pretty good experiment. She was exploring gluten-free and which recipe is the best, and we had some taste tests, and that was cool. Until you see, like, the scientist's daughter, and her science experiment was far beyond what any of the other kids could do. I say all that because what Solomon is able to try and able to pursue is beyond anything that you and I ever could do, okay? We're going to drop into Ecclesiastes chapter 2 here. Verse 1. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. And there it is. He's going to test. He's going to experiment. I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. The very first scene that Solomon tiptoes into is pleasure. And so he's asking the question, will I find some meaning in life? Will this vanity thing that I've discovered, can I blow it apart with more pleasure? If I enjoy myself a bit more, will things begin to change? And so Solomon takes all of his time, all of his resources, all of the wealth of his kingdom, and aims it to try to consume as much pleasure as possible. What would that look like? What would it look like for a man who knows no limits to aim all of his vast resources at pleasure? He even talks about laughter. This was a good week of study for me. When I see laughter, I don't know, I just get a little excited, like, what would that be? What makes you guys laugh? Can I just say, comedians, absolutely, they tear me apart. I find comedians so fun. The way that they can take life, flip it around like in that punchline and just hammer you, and I just love them. And so part of my study this week is I got to watch some comedians to be reminded of how much laughter can come. And I picture Solomon. You know, he's grabbing some of the Jimmy Kimmels, Larry the Cable Guy, and he's bringing them up to the palace, and just for the Christian folks, he's throwing in a little Tim Hawkins into the mix, and he's putting them up front. There's a comedy sketch going on, and all of it because Solomon wants to explore, if I have fun, if I laugh, is anything going to change in this life? He's on full-on party mode, and it's not just the comedians. He's got loads of food. He's importing barrels and barrels of wine. He's tapping the local craft kegs. He's on full-on party mode. And here's a perspective of what a party scene for Solomon might look like. This is coming out of 1 Kings. This is one day in the life of Solomon, okay? Solomon's daily provisions were 30 kor of fine flour, okay? 30 kor, that's, if this means anything, 185 bushels, which probably also means nothing to us. 11,000 pounds of flour every day. That's the resources that we're talking about that Solomon is aiming. He has 30 kor of fine flour, 60 kor of meal. That's 18,000, almost 19,000 pounds of cornmeal coming into the palace saying, bring it. We're partying. We're enjoying. He goes on. 10 head of stall-fed cattle. 20 head of pasture-fed cattle. That's for all the food allergy people out there. If you can't have the gluten, you want those cattle. He's got 10 coming in from the stalls, 20 coming in from the pastures, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles. I have no idea what roebucks are, and choice fowl. One day. Oh, Doug's like, yeah, I shot one of those. I know what those are. Yeah. One day in the life of Solomon is that. And that's outside of his party mode. That's a normal day in Solomon's life. And so we're going to the Dodges later today for a barbecue. It's going to be great. I'm sure we're going to pick up some hamburger, some steak. We're going to live it up. And just picture Solomon on the back like, seriously? A caliph steak? Where's the other 30 cattle that are supposed to be here? And so I think there'll probably be 10 to 15 of us at the Dodges, where Solomon's in the back like, that's nursery school. Where's the other 19,000 people that are supposed to be gathered together partying? He's feeding a whole city. Our little Memorial Day parties with the grill going on today is far from what Solomon is testing out here. And at some point, after all the comedians roll through, after all the barbecues, after all the parties, there comes a day in Solomon's life that he just gets tired of it all. Like, tired of doing backflips off the car after a wild night, tired of waking up in the chariot, on the way to Tijuana searching for a new tattoo, just tired of all the insanity that's coming from his seeking pleasure, okay? And so he's got to move on somewhere. He's already come to the conclusion, pleasure isn't meeting my sole need here. It's vain, it's meaningless. And so he goes into, doesn't that sound like college years right there? It's very interesting to me. As Solomon moves through this, you kind of see different periods of our life. That in younger years, you tend to kind of pursue some of these things. Solomon's choosing now something that might be a little more relevant for those of you in middle age. Verse 4. I undertook great projects. What's he doing? I'm working hard. I'm putting in overtime. I'm going to accomplish something here. I'm skilled at my trade. I want to rise in the corporate ladder. I want to make an impact on the world, right? So for some of us, that's a more relevant place. Solomon's going to test in here too. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kind of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female servants and had other slaves who were born in my house. It took Israel 7 years to build the temple. The temple is this incredibly ornate structure. Second Kings devotes tons of chapters to it, as does Chronicles. It's like detailed out. It's a massive project, 7 years. Do you know how long it took Solomon to build his house? 14 years. All right? That gives you a scope of this man. 7 years to build the temple, 14 years to build Solomon's house. This is a big project. It's more time consuming, requires more resources than the temple itself. Solomon built houses for all of his wives as well. Best guess, somewhere south of 700 women, whether they're wives or concubines, that he's spending time with. We'll get into that in a minute, but there's loads of them. And for those of us who have ever lived at a parent's house and then finally stepped out and moved out and eventually bought a home, do you remember the first time you bought a home? Remember some of those feelings? It didn't matter what that home was like, right? It could have been a hole in the ground with a few timber frames around it, but if it was yours, you had the same feeling. It's my place. I'm settled. I can set down some roots. I got a text from a friend this week who just bought his first home. He's putting an above ground pool and just put a lift in one of his garages. Sent me this picture, and at the bottom of it was, I love owning my own home. Okay? Expressing the same feeling that you and I have. It's great to have a place. And Solomon is beginning to experience some of that same thing. Owning a home, having a place, setting down some roots. He's building something. He's accomplishing something. And when it's describing what he planted, does anyone have a version other than NIV out there? In verse 6, I made reservoirs to water. Does anyone have a different word sitting right there?
I had pools where I could get water for the trees.
Trees. Anyone have the word forest in there? Some of the versions correctly translate groves of trees to forests. These pools, they're still in Israel. There's 3 massive craters in the ground that Solomon used to water his forest. So it's springtime, right? We're doing spring cleanup. The other day I was out with my hose watering some of the flowers, and I'm picturing, this is pathetic. Solomon's watering his national park that he just planted. He's testing beyond what you and I ever could. What he's building, what he's accomplishing is beyond anything that we ever could. He's watering his forest. He's leaving a legacy. He moves from the party scene to try to make something of himself, to make an impact on the world around him. And after all of that, he moves into a different phase. A lot of you are in this phase. You're not partying anymore, particularly like looking to tap the keg and spend the night. You're not really anymore producing or driven by, I need further education or credentialing, or I need to make an impact on my workplace or develop that new product. Your mind's not there anymore. For some of you, you're in retirement. And retirement has an altogether different framework that you think in, right? For those of you who are retired, one of the things that folks tell you, your pastor tries to challenge this a lot. But folks try to tell you you've earned it, you deserve it, it's time to just take it all in and relax, right? For those of you who might be financially able to do so, that's a real temptation. Just go travel and enjoy and kick back. And so as a church community, we hold it pretty dear that there's always a place. You always have value. You always have something to give. God's not through with you. Continue to connect and strive and give and serve and be who God created you to be. But culturally, that's not the message. Once you hit retirement, you need this amount in your bank account so you don't have to work anymore. And if you have that amount, you can kick back, relax, take it all in. And that's where Solomon's going to go. He's experienced a pleasure. He's tried to accomplish a lot. And now he's kicking back into a life of wealth and ease. Verse 7. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well. The delights of the hearts of man, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. He's so comfortable that his slaves had slaves. Like, it wasn't just one layer of servants. His servants had servants to them. He takes advantage of all of his accumulated wealth, everything that he's accomplished. He's even brought in the singers. I love that. So if you're a guest at Solomon's palace during these days, he's not content taking out his iPod and finding the music. He's like, oh, you want to listen to Bono? Hold on. Bono, come out. He's purchased the singers. He's brought the singers to his palace simply to entertain as he kicks back. He's got 700 wives. Part of this, and it just is, and we're going to hit this in other parts of the book. The reality is Solomon has uninhibited sexual experiences. It's why he's got so many women there. We're not going to explore it today, but this is an outright, what we would call hedonistic scene. This is all about Solomon getting whatever Solomon wants. And at the end, he has a summary of it. You can imagine he's super popular, right? In Jerusalem. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. But then he has this phrase, in all this, my wisdom stayed with me. Meaning, through those crazy years of pleasure, through the hard toil of labor, and through kicking back and taking it all in, I never lost sight of why I'm doing this. My wisdom stayed with me. All along, every day, every night, I knew exactly what I was doing. I'm testing to see if any of this makes a difference. Okay? He never lost sight of that through all these days. And part of the conclusion of his study, his experiment, is verse 10. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Did Solomon enjoy himself? Yeah. I mean, if you try to take all the church stuff off and you just ask that, yes. In fact, he tells us he took delight in all of it. Solomon, I think part of his conclusion is like, I'm not going to lie, the parties were super fun. I mean, we had a blast. The house, the wives, the singers, the forest, the horse ranches, pretty awesome stuff. And what did he get for it? And this is where he begins to turn. It was a blast. It was good. But that's all it was. That momentary feeling of enjoyment, that was my reward for it all. Is pleasure and enjoyment bad? I want us to hear this because this could be very easy to walk away and come to a different conclusion. Is pleasure and enjoyment bad? No. All right? No. If you need that again, no. Pleasure and enjoyment is not bad. I do not want you to walk away and say, God likes it when I have a miserable time in life, and so I need to get rid of everything and not smile, and if I start laughing and enjoying, oh no, I'm getting out of it. That's not who your God is. Pleasure and enjoyment are a gift from the Lord. All right? They're a gift that comes from God. We don't necessarily need a potluck for fun. All right? Potlucks are great, but they are not the end definition of having fun. Sometimes there's lots of pleasure, lots of enjoyment to be had outside of the church environment, and we need to get that. Because if we don't get that, we're going to lose sight of what Solomon concludes here. If someone doesn't read a Bible verse, doesn't mean the time wasn't well spent. People outside of Jesus, and this sounds silly to even say it, people outside of Jesus can have a great time. Right? They really can. And I think it's pretty condescending of the church when we look outside of the church to say, they're not really having fun. Yes, they are. They really, really are. But there's a difference that Solomon is going to come to. And it's not whether or not they're having pleasure. Not whether or not they're having fun. For Solomon, like all of us, at some point, the new things become old. The exciting things become boring. Have you ever been there? Where you're like, that was fun at one point. I just can't do that anymore. I'm done. I'm finished. The new becomes old. The exciting, boring. And so he keeps adding layers to it and more, and wakes up on Monday and says, hey, that was great, and so what are we going to do today? People bring in another 30 head of cattle, and up comes a barbecue, and he goes to bed Monday night, wakes up Tuesday, and like, all right, we've done that, but all right, well, let's bring in 31, and we'll try a new kind of wine, and at some point, it's not fun anymore. It's not fun. God is not opposed to pleasure and fun. How do I know this? How did He create Adam and Eve? What was their physical state? Thank you. They're naked in a garden, all right? Without any regrets, without any shame. And if I'm honest with you, that's a great place to start, right there. Pretty good design, God. That there's no shame, there's no embarrassment. This is how it's supposed to be in a lush garden to enjoy God, walking with your wife, enjoying her as she's walking with her husband, enjoying him. Great start to it all. And I'm really sorry we messed it up. Because God intended the human heart for pleasure. There's feasts and celebrations and good times all throughout Scripture. There's wine and song and dance all throughout Scripture. People enjoying themselves. Because God's not a killjoy. He's far from it. He's the author of these times. He's not their enemy. C.S. Lewis has a quote many of you have heard. But if you watch a baby, what is a baby's primary goal in life? Yeah, I heard a few. I think you're all describing the same thing. They want to be satisfied, right? They want what they want. They want to be happy. And so, does a baby care if it wakes up at 3 a.m. and they're hungry? Does he care about your sleep and your needs, moms? No. I'm hungry. All right, let's fire it up. Okay. Or, better yet, when a toddler is in your home, or right before they start walking, I love to see especially dads who are playing with their kids. The kids want a connection, but they're down on the floor, right? And unless someone picks them up, I love seeing dads go down on the floor with their kids. Like the kid is saying, you're going to entertain me, and you're going to entertain me right now, and you're going to do it right down here. And dads take great delight, and so do moms. But it's fun watching the kids do what they do. I want fun. I want pleasure. I want to be pleased. Why is that? Is it because they're sinful and they're bad and they're evil creatures? Sometimes we think that. But at the end of the day, they're wired exactly the way God wired them. And you know what's funny? You and I are still wired that way. We just mature and change and grow up and walk on two legs. But you're still wired for pleasure. In fact, this is the quote from C.S. Lewis. If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, meaning, oh no, pleasure's bad, I shouldn't enjoy things. He's saying, if that's true, I submit that this notion has crept in from Kant, who's a philosopher from the 1800s. Crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. Meaning, God's not out there saying, please don't enjoy, please don't take pleasure. God is out there potentially saying, you're not pushing that far enough. You're not looking for enough enjoyment. You're not looking for enough pleasure. And Lewis finishes off by saying, we are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition. Does that sound like what we just read? We're half-hearted creatures fooling around just like Solomon did. When infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by an offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased, Lewis concludes. In Romans, God teaches us, and Paul writes, the reason for this is because we've exchanged the glory of the infinite God, the one who loves you most, the one who wired you and developed you and knows you. We've exchanged the worship of that God with the worship of His created things. And in that, we have lost a lot of joy. And we have lost a lot of meaning. And at the end, verse 11, Solomon seems to resound with Lewis. It's like he's tasting what he's talking about. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And nothing was gained under the sun. Have you ever been there? Where you just feel like the treadmill of life is going and you used to be 20 and now you're 40, or you used to be 40, now you're 60, or you used to be 60 and now you're 80, and you're just like, I don't know. Life lost its meaning. I just feel like I'm spinning around in this thing, and as I'm spinning around, the years are ticking off, and I don't know if I've gone anywhere. I don't know if anything has mattered. And Solomon concludes, as he looks at his experiences, it's been meaningless. It's been meaningless. I want to share it. I want to share this. The idea of chasing the wind. Can you chase the wind? Yeah, I mean, I guess you could, right? You'll never catch it, which is kind of the point, because there'll never be money enough. If I'm honest with you, I would love to try it someday, like to have what I would think is money enough. I think that would be an interesting experiment that I would not refuse if anyone wanted to make me wealthy and give it a shot. I'll let you know how that goes. But here's what I suspect. I suspect that I'd be like Rockefeller, who someone asked him, how much money is enough? I believe he's the guy that was like, oh, $1 more will be enough. And I suspect I'd be that same guy, that if I had lots of wealth, just even in saying that, I do have lots of wealth. And here I am saying, just a little more, we'll try that. If you could accomplish a bit more, once you do, what do you want to do? If you want to sit back in retirement, take it all in, enjoy it, well, you never quite get to the place of saying, boom, that was great, I've enjoyed it all. You want a little more. And that's why Solomon uses that image. Chasing after the wind. You can do it. It's just a process that will never, ever end. You'll keep chasing and you'll never grab hold of it. Why is that? In chapter 3, Solomon identifies something that's huge. Because God has set eternity in the hearts of men. You know what's inside of you? Is this little blip, this little created, divinely appointed thing that I think we still taste creation. And I think we still long for what God has for us. Eternity. It's just right now we're experiencing something that's not eternity. And because God has wired that into our hearts, we're chasing after it. We're chasing after eternity. Things that will eternally satisfy. Things that will provide eternal meaning to us. But in the created order, they're not here. And so we come up short. We come up short. Jesus said something similar to the woman at the well. It's the story of Jesus meeting a woman and he's thirsty. He's with his guys. They go out shopping. And Jesus asked the woman, could you get me a drink? And she's a little embarrassed. He wasn't supposed to ask like that. And she offers him a drink. And then Jesus in return offers this woman who's suffering, who's on the treadmill of life. It's not going anywhere. He offers her this beautiful thing. I will give you living water, and you'll never thirst again. And her reaction, of course, if you remember it, is like, wait, you don't even have a cup. Because she can't comprehend what Jesus is offering. That it's not a cup of water. It's joy and fulfillment that lasts for all eternity. So here's my conclusion for you. My conclusion is really simple. There are things God has put on your heart. I know it because some of you have shared it with me. There are things God has put on your heart that it's come out like, I really should fill in the blank. I've been thinking about fill in the blank. It could be praying. It could be reading. It could be connecting with a friend. It could be finding a ministry area. It could be serving the poor. It could be generous something towards someone else. It could be a Bible study. It's all over the place. God has set something on your heart that we haven't taken a step yet. And I want to encourage you, instead of chasing after the pleasure, the wealth, the enjoyment of it all, I want to encourage you this week, whatever that thing is that you've put off for a long time, would you be willing to say, God, I'll take a step in that direction, trusting that it'll step me off the treadmill, trusting it'll step me into some meaning, trusting that it'll be a step. It's not the whole thing, it's not the whole solution, but trusting it'll be a step towards things that matter for eternity. That step could be a step of forgiveness. It could be a step to pray for someone. I don't know what it is for you, but I know there's something for each of us. And I want to encourage you this week, would you consider it a little more intensely? To say, God, this treadmill thing isn't working. I agree with Solomon. It feels meaningless. And to say, I will step here. Speaking of that, we have a baptism coming up next week that I'm really excited about. But we have a change of plans. Instead of going to one side of Swains Lake, we're heading to the other side of Swains Lake. So all of you should have gotten a postcard, or I think there might be some in the bulletin. The 9 houses have a camp down on Swains Lake. It's right off Beauty Hill Road. There's a map on that postcard. We are going to celebrate and feast, at least like FCCB style. It won't be Solomon style. But we're going to try to have a good time together, but we're also going to celebrate some of the work that Jesus has been doing in people's lives with the baptism. So I want to invite all of you right after church. So here's the good news. I'm going to keep the sermon short next week. So and we'll head down to the lake together. Feel free to bring bathing suits, whatever you want to do. We're just going to hang out as a church family celebrating what God has been doing among us next week. So let me close in prayer and invite our music team back up. Oh yeah, thank you. So yes, everybody, because there's not eternal parking down in there. It's not tight, but it's pretty tight. We will encourage every car to have someone that's not normally in that car, in the car. Okay? That is our big carpool plan. Make sure there's a face that you don't normally see in your car as you drive down. Thank you. All right. Worship team, come on up. Let me close in prayer. Lord, I thank you that your word is profitable for teaching, correcting, rebuking, and training in righteousness. And Father, I pray that your Spirit applies your word to our hearts this week. God, for those of us who have been chasing after pleasure, Lord, would you interrupt us with that one word, meaningless? God, for those of us who have set our minds and chased after wealth and filled in that blank, if only with a monetary value, God, would your Spirit just speak meaninglessness to us? Lord, for those of us who maybe are kicking back, taking it in, enjoying what we've earned, Lord, would you speak the same word to us? God, we need you to show us things that matter. We need you to show us things of eternity. We need you to show us things that bring joy and meaning rushing in. And all of it, God, is wrapped up in Jesus' name. We are forever grateful that he came in our time, in our space, to interrupt the treadmill, to bring kingdom glory and kingdom values here, that we might see differently, that we might live differently, that we might hope differently. God, would we be faithful in worshiping him? Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.